Namaste, welcome to Hinduism Now Global Press news updates for December 29th, 2021. Today we will be looking at the so-called anti-conversion legislation that has come up in Karnataka state. There's been quite a bit of opposition and talk about it. The Protection of Right to Freedom of Religion bill. So we'll look at why conversion. What is the history of conversion? Where is it coming from? What is the declared intention? And what is some of the history? Not so much specific controversy about this bill, but as it's not yet become a law, but it has been discussed in various levels and has been reported on a lot and has been the subject of some controversy as to what is the purpose and meaning of this, what is the intention, what is the history, what is the outcome and result, and whether or not this is needed and what is the intended purpose, and what we can expect from this kind of interaction. So we'll start off by looking directly at the Karnataka state. Karnataka takes steps towards anti-conversion laws. The bill proposes maximum punishment of 10 years of imprisonment for forcible conversion of people from scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, minors and women to another religion. So the intention here, as of now, is that this bill will continue to be discussed through January. And there's been various different protests and opposition to this type of legislation by various groups expressing that it's imposition on their freedom to convert people. Specifically in India, the freedom to convert Hindus to other religions. So there's a perspective that it's the freedom of the religion of other religions to convert Hindus to their religion. And that any kind of legislation that comes to protect the right to freedom of religion for Hindus, specifically in this case in India, is an imposition against the rights of other religions to convert Hindus. So here the Archbishop of Bangalore handed over a memorandum to the Karnataka CM opposing the proposed anti-conversion law. So the law is still in the state of a bill. It's being discussed. And there has been protests in various places against this protection of right to freedom of religion bill. If we look a little bit more into some of the history of conversion, specifically in India, if we look into the Nagaland case, it's quite a glaring example of what happens with various groups and what has happened with various groups in India, specifically the case of Nagaland. So if we look into the statistics of Nagaland, in 1941, the Christian presence there basically was nil. So just 4 decades later, in 1981, it's 80%. From 1941 to 1951, the population of Christian went from near 0% to near 50% in 10 years. And now, the estimated population of Christian in Nagaland here is saying over 90%, and statistics traditionally show well over 80%. Not only that, there are calls frequently that Nagaland should become a separate state from India. And just this past week, one of the political leaders in Tamil Nadu tweeted that Tamil Nadu should become a separate state from India, a separate country. So we look at, in terms of breaking India forces, we look at how first Nagaland goes through this conversion phase in just a few short number of years. Traditionally being people whose lifestyle has been sustained more than any other lifestyle existing today on the planet. Going through a process of conversion in just a few short number of years, so that the indigenous population and way of life is essentially entirely extinct. And then the calls come from that population to say that that state should be broken apart from India, as was the tweet earlier for Tamil Nadu, that these states first get converted and then literally looking to break away from India. So this is some of the historical precedent. If we look in, for example, with this representative picture, what this image is showing is, in addition to the text, these priests here are wearing the cross, but obviously dressed like sannyasis, and wearing the tilak also. So anyone would look at this picture and it looks a lot like Hindu sannyasis, obviously. If you took the cross away, you would have to know that they are Hindu sannyasis. If you took the cross away from the neck. So this slide reads, Nagaland has more than 90% Christian population. The 1964 treaty with the Christian missionary Warrior Elwin was signed, and according to which Hindu sadhus were banned from entering Nagaland. So this is the image of the treaty that was signed in 1964 between the then ruling Indian government in the 1964. This is from the English Daily Patriot, dated October 15, 1964. A treaty was signed with the missionary Warrior Elwin, which banned the entire entry of sadhus into Nagaland. So a treaty was signed that banned the entry of sadhus into Nagaland. So the article headline is, Nagaland safe from sadhus. So there's a long history of legislation against indigenous Hindu populations. For example, the 1871 Criminal Tribes Act ended up criminalizing a lot of what is known as scheduled castes, or so-called backward castes today. Ended up criminalizing more than 200 people groups, more than 200 indigenous groups, Hindu groups, criminalizing them by either birth or association or practice. And one of those groups was also sadhus. So this looking like a group of sadhus. If you're a sadhu here in 1964, you're not allowed to enter into Nagaland. At 1964, we see that was just following the period where over half of the population had been converted to Christianity. The 1871 Criminal Tribes Act ended up criminalizing more than 200 people groups just by association. So, and a lot of these laws ended up being related to forestry laws, where people were not traditionally allowed to gather resources from the forest, and therefore were not allowed to do traditional forms of farming. So had their livelihood taken away, their ability to sustain themselves taken away. The entire population gets converted. And then the push is to separate that section of the traditional Hindu nations into other nations that are already of a different religious capacity. So we just need to really understand some of why this happens and how it happens, because there has been a lot of opposition against the Protection of Right to Freedom of Religion bill that's being discussed currently in Karnataka. And there is some historical precedent of various other states in India that have enacted similar protection of conversion laws with various results and various different forms of implementation. One of the things we'll look into today is something that is called the Lausanne movement. So when we look at some of the current opposition to the protection of the freedom of religion bill from Karnataka state, and wonder, why is it such an issue? Why is it such a problem? Why is it such a problem that Hindus should be protected, especially indigenous people groups, should be protected against certain forms of nefarious conversion? Why is that such a problem? And why is there so much opposition to it? That Hindus should be able to protect themselves in India. And this is one of the answers. This is one of the clearly stated answers. You can go to this lausanne.org website. It's a multinational corporation with many different groups involved and a lot of financial backing. And this specific history goes back to the signing of something called the Lausanne Covenant in Switzerland in 1974, where more than 2,000 evangelist entities signed this covenant that has to do with, essentially, in their own words, which we'll see, global evangelization. So it was a international congress on the global evangelization. So when we learn about Lausanne movement, for example, and Joshua Project is another that identifies populations all around the world that are targets, in their own words, unreached peoples. And so when Hindus may be looking to enact laws that protect their tradition and protect their way of life in India and in other places, but when there's opposition to that, we have to ask why. Why is there such an important struggle against Hindus protecting their way of life? And is that valid? What is the perspective that says Hindus should not be able to preserve their way of life? So it's an ancient tradition going back many tens of thousands of years, and the only civilization going back that far that is still preserved in that form today. It's the only living ancient civilization from that form of previous time till now. So why should Hindus not be allowed to protect that? There's temples in India that are thousands of years old. If you find a church that's 100 years old in North America, there's an extremely old church. So what were these single entity temples that, for example, Mahabalipuram and places like this, just a single entity temple, Chidambaram, that has been preserved in that form for thousands of years. It may look like one single entity. That temple has been performing puja in that place for thousands of years, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years. So these histories of these temples go back that long. So something extremely strong was protected for a very long time, and all over India. So this was happening all over the place, that these places were not destroyed by invaders, they were not destroyed by your neighbors. There was a certain respect given to these Hindu institutions, this way of Hindu life, in places all over India. Kailash Temple, Ellora Caves, you look at these places, are extremely ancient, extremely profound, and demonstrating technologies that we don't have any idea how to replicate today. So why should legislation that is enacted to protect this way of life, that is obviously under attack as we see through the Nagaland statistics and otherwise, why should it be something that is so opposed that Hindus should not be able to protect themselves? We look at Lausanne movement, things make a lot of sense. That's why we're looking at it. So you can go and see on the lausanne.org website for yourself. So the Lausanne movement website has railed many pages actually against the so-called anti-conversion legislation designed to protect the Hindu religious rights and conscious sovereignty, the Swaraja Shakti. So the self-governance power, the power of your own consciousness to manifest yourself as Paramashiva, as the ultimate. This should be the first amendment to any constitution, the first right given for, to, and from. That you have the right to manifest yourself as the divine source and to be seen as that and to see others as that. This should be the first right for anyone, that you have the power to manifest yourself as your source. So the Lausanne Movement website has railed many pages. You can go see many pages against anti-conversion, against the Protection of Religious Rights bill. Bills from around the world, actually. So they do an intense study. These organizations like Lausanne Movement and Joshua Project do an intense study funded by many billions of dollars for many decades. And it explains why there's opposition against Hindus protecting their life. So in the page, the website writes many pages of the detriments of legislations around the world in many countries that aims to protect indigenous traditions such as Hinduism, of the current anti-conversion efforts to protect Hindus in India, with reference to anti-conversion efforts within India. The website says, the introduction of similar provisions in other South Asian legal systems is a disturbing trend and requires the attention of the international community, as they stand in direct contrast to the rights and liberties guaranteed under international law. So the movement is to garner international support against Hindus protecting themselves from forced conversion. So the look here from Lausanne Movement is, we need to appeal to international community because the Hindus are trying to protect themselves, and that obfuscates our right to convert them. They even, on the website, statistics are given as to what is the result of anti-conversion, so-called anti-conversion laws. So there's a lot of research and a lot of graphics, a lot of work, time and money and effort and media enacted to raise this perspective to other people. The Lausanne Covenant is one of the most influential documents in modern evangelicalism, as in July of 1974, a religious manifesto promoting active worldwide Christian evangelism was signed by over 2,300 evangelicals in attendance at Lausanne, Switzerland in 1974, with participants from 150 nations gathered to hear from Billy Graham and others at the International Congress on World Evangelization. The purpose of the Congress was, in the words of Lausanne Movement, to reframe the global Christian mission. In 1974, more than 2,300 evangelicals gathered in Lausanne, Switzerland, from more than 150 countries, to attend the International Congress on World Evangelization, with the purpose to reframe the global Christian mission. The global Christian mission. In the words of the Lausanne Movement supporters themselves, the website estimates that 85% of mission organizations in Latin America use the Lausanne Covenant as their statement of faith. So 85% of the mission organizations in Latin America use this Lausanne Covenant as their statement of faith. So it's extremely influential. It's not a small organization, it's not a small thing. It's growing all the time, and the international meetings continue, as we will see later with the Manila Manifesto that happened 15 years after 1974 in 1989. Now this is some more of the information from the Lausanne.org. So this states on the uniqueness and universality of Christ. So we need to learn, why is there such strong opposition to Hindus supporting their communities and supporting themselves? Why would there be such strong opposition to Hindus protecting their way of life? Why? Where does this come from? Why? So let's go to the people, the sources themselves. They'll tell us. This Lausanne.org tells you clearly, frankly, if this kind of information is available in your face, in huge with huge graphs and graphics and productions on an ongoing basis for the last 47 years, and it's published globally as part of a multi-billion-dollar corporate cooperation for world evangelization, then you should know about it. If something this big is created for the purpose of converting Hindus, and it's published with this kind of wording, then you should know about it. You should go there and you should know about it. So one of the points here from the Lausanne Covenant that was signed in 1974 by 2,300 evangelicals for world evangelization says, we're starting with the highlighted areas, we also reject as derogatory to Christ and the gospel every kind of syncretism and dialogue which implies that Christ speaks equally through all religions and ideologies. Jesus Christ is the only mediator between God and people. There is no other name by which we must be saved. All men and women are perishing because of sin. Those who reject Christ condemn themselves to eternal separation from God. God's love for a world of sinners, every tongue shall confess him as Lord. So we reject as derogatory any dialogue that implies that Christ speaks equally through all religions and ideologies. So any dialogue, anything that says that Christ or the Messiah, the Savior, speaks equally through all religions and ideologies is rejected. Jesus Christ is the only mediator between God and people. So there can be no other, in the words of the Lausanne Covenant. There's no other name. So that's one part. So initially they're telling us there can be no discussion that there's any other possible way, any other religion or ideology that can communicate what Christ can, and that Jesus Christ is the only mediator between God and people. So there can be no other way. So first off, we see that they're saying, Lausanne Covenant is saying that Lausanne Covenant and this path is the only possible path for anyone. No other way can be ever accepted. So that explains a lot why Hindus would need to be converted. Because your way can never be accepted, accepted as valid. And it says, those who reject Christ condemn themselves to eternal separation from God. So your way can never be accepted, and if you do your way, you'll condemn yourself to eternal separation. Essentially, eternal suffering, eternal hell. So if you follow a way other than this way, you will be condemned to eternal hell. So that's why they want to save you and convert you. Because if you follow anything other than Lausanne Covenant way, you'll be eternally condemned to hell. There's no discussion. It's rejected as derogatory, any dialogue that even implies that Christ speaks equally through all religions and ideologies. Second part in here says is, all men and women are perishing because of sin. So it's saying all men and women are perishing because of sin. So all men and women are sinners. So all of you are sinners. So that's categorically, so what's being said is, if you follow any other way, you'll be condemned to hell, eternal separation. and you are a sinner. So this is categorically, fundamentally different than the way that Hindus view people, that your source is the ultimate source, and that ultimate source is manifest as you, and you can live that, and you're not condemned to eternal sinning and suffering. You are actually a manifestation of consciousness that should manifest the ultimate consciousness and encourage all others and support all others to manifest their source consciousness as ultimate as well. In that your path can be different and varied, and the Hindu lifestyle is supporting others to manifest their highest consciousness. So whereas Hinduism can support all traditions by raising your consciousness, this Lausanne Covenant is saying, we will not accept any other path other than this as Jesus Christ, and any of thing different than that is eternally condemned to hell. And you are a sinner. And the last statement, every tongue shall confess him as Lord. So it's needed in the Lausanne Covenant, it's needed that if you're not agreed with that ideology, you're a sinner, eternally condemned to hell, and your tongue must confess Jesus Christ as Lord. So this is not any, this are the words from the lausanne.org website. So you just go there and see. So we just need to learn more about what exactly is said. Like, what exactly is the story? Why should Hindus not be allowed to protect themselves? Why so much, all of a sudden, so much opposition about, even Hindus start talking about protecting and preserving their life, so much opposition comes. Protests, huge protests, fasting, vows to go on hunger strikes. Because Hindus have decided that they should protect their way of life somehow. Why is it such a problem? So when we go to Lausanne Movement website, they tell us why it's such a big problem. So the following the Lausanne Covenant in 1974, the Manila Manifesto was created in 1989 as 21 affirmations. So there was a number of affirmations of the Lausanne Covenant in 1974. Here is number 3. And in 1989, there was 21 affirmations, 15 years after 1974, in 1989. So it may be shocking to some, but it does clearly spell out the condemnation of all others on earth who do not accept the Lausanne movement, which we saw in the previous slide. So we're just going to go through some of the points from the Manila Manifesto that came in 1989, and the meetings continue about how to address things in 2000 and moving forward with the new digital economy and whatnot, how to reach people, how to influence them. And so we see a lot of the efforts are very unexpected. For example, you wouldn't be able to go to any church in North America and see this representation of Jesus with 4 arms. That would be very rare if you could find something like that, and especially with a Jesus wearing a kumkum. This likely doesn't exist in North America. So we have to ask, why is Jesus being represented this way? Because that is not a traditional representation, certainly in North America, as to how Jesus is represented. So we just have to see how it's being enacted. So again, here's Jesus depicted as Buddha on lotus. So you'd be hard pressed to find any church in North or South America that presents Jesus like that, probably even outside of India. And then in the middle, Jesus represented as Subramanya with the veil and the vibhuti and kumkum and rudrakshas. Outside of India, there wouldn't be any reason why you would see this. So why is Jesus being depicted as a Hindu, actually? Was Jesus a Hindu? Did he wear kumkum and vibhuti and carry a veil? Did he teach people to live like that? Did he teach about yoga and kumkum? Did he teach about vibhuti? Did he teach about Subramanya? Did he teach about the life of Buddha? Did he teach those things? Why is he being represented? Why is he dressed up as Subramanya? Why is Jesus wearing kumkum? If you showed these pictures to people in churches in North America, probably it would be taken as blasphemy. So we see that Ishavasya Upanishad is called as the doctrine of the immanence of Jesus with commentary. So the Ishavasya Upanishad, the first of 108 Upanishads, first declares Ishavasyam Idigam Sarvam. The consciousness pervades everything, which according to Lausanne movement would not be the case, because any manifestation, they're saying, any dialogue about Christ as anything but the only source is not tolerated. We'll quickly go through some more of the points from the Lausanne movement website, and specifically the Manila Manifesto. So the website says, "We affirm that human beings, though created in the image of God, are sinful and guilty and lost without Christ, and that this truth is a necessary preliminary to the gospel." So again, human beings are sinful and guilty and lost without Christ. So all the Hindus who, again from Ishavasya Upanishad, saying that the consciousness pervades everything as your source, that is negated by this. You're sinful and guilty. You're not consciousness, you're sinful and guilty, and you're lost without Christ. So we just have to understand, what is the discussion that goes on? How are Hindus viewed? Hindus are viewed as sinful and guilty and lost without Christ. Actually, all humanity, as this statement says. So Christ is the only way, not other religions. We affirm that other religions and ideologies are not alternative paths to God. Affirm it. And that human spirituality, if unredeemed by Christ, leads not to God, but to judgment. For Christ is the only way. So there are no alternative paths to God. That leads you only to judgment. Christ is the only way. So these are multiple points debated upon and agreed upon by thousands of evangelicals for decades. Spiritual weapons for victory over powers of evil. So we affirm that spiritual warfare demands spiritual weapons, and that we must both preach the word in the power of the Spirit and pray constantly that we may enter into Christ's victory over the principalities and powers of evil. So what is the powers of evil? Here, other religions lead to judgment. And as we saw earlier, eternal separation. So other religions lead you to eternal separation. That's the power, that's the eternal separation, the condemnation, the damnation, the hell. So the eternal separation is the one form of that hell. So that's the evil. So the other religions are the powers of evil because they're taking you away from the Christ. So this is clearly what the Lausanne website is saying. Other religions are not alternatives. It leads you to judgment and the eternal condemnation. The power of evil, pulling you away from the one and only way. So we must use spiritual weapons against the other religions that are powers of evil. So we have to use the weapons against the anti-conversion bills. The Hindus trying to protect themselves. So it's just, the mission statement is clear. It's just to see that the mission statement is extensive, extremely extensive, and extremely clear. So you have to understand why this makes sense. It makes sense when you go to, there's billions of dollars being spent to publish this. Please, people, see it. They're putting it number by number by number in beautiful website for you to see. Please see it. The whole gospel. The gospel is the good news of God's salvation from the power of evil. Again, the establishment of His eternal kingdom and His final victory over everything which defies His purpose. So that was stated before. Other religions are defying His purpose. His final victory over everything which defies His purpose, and every tongue, the last line, every tongue shall confess Him as Lord. Him Lord. So, it's not to condemn any tradition or practice. It's just to understand why the vehement opposition to Hindus protecting themselves. Is it becoming clear? It should become clear, because this doctrine, the covenant, is saying you are bound by what they're calling us Christ. You are bound by Christ to not be in eternal separation. Christ is the only way. The victory over the principles and powers of evil, which is the other religions that are defying His purpose, to have the victory over everything. So that's why this Lausanne covenant is saying it's your responsibility as someone who signs on to this covenant. It's your responsibility to have victory over every other tradition that is by definition defying His purpose. So it's your responsibility when you sign on to this to convert everyone else. This was termed as the International Congress on World Evangelization. In 1974, that's what it was called. The International Congress on World Evangelization. So that's what they're talking, that's what the Lausanne Covenant is talking about. World evangelization. How to approach it. So the Hindus need to be converted. Otherwise, they're in eternal separation, and they're defying His purpose, and they are the principalities and powers of evil by definition, because they're separate from the only possible salvation, which is, in the words of the Lausanne Covenant, the Christ. There's no solution to sin and guilt, this says. And self-help techniques can at the most alleviate felt needs. They cannot address the solemn realities of sin, guilt, and judgment. So this is completely different than what Sanatana Hindu Dharma says, and even with the chakra science. Guilt is associated with the Vishuddhi chakra, and comparison. So Vishuddhi chakra is blocked when you're stuck in comparison, when you compare yourself to others, and then therefore will feel guilt. So the Vishuddhi chakra is unlocked by expressing your unique energies. So Sanatana Hindu Dharma has the solution for guilt. We have it. Manifest your unique energy. That's what Varnashrama Dharma is. No matter what kind of work you want to do in society and go through a system, no matter what kind of being comes, whatever kind of jati they're born into, space they come into, they can choose their varna, how they want to contribute to society, making sure through Gotra system, whatever kind of DNA your consciousness chooses to manifest in that DNA, we make sure whatever form of Varnashrama Dharma you're living in, we align it to the higher conscious evolution for you. So as you continue in your life evolutions, you get access and direction towards the highest conscious liberation. Whether you choose to be any kind of role you choose in society, whether doctor, lawyer, farmer, mendicant, merchant, whatever you choose, Sanatana Hindu Dharma entire system with Varnashrama Dharma and Gotra is to make sure you have all the supports necessary to also manifest your highest possible consciousness, regardless of what form of work or activity or in the artha that you choose to contribute to society. So this saying that they cannot address the solemn realities of sin. Spiritual practice cannot address the solemn realities of guilt. But Sanatana Dharma, through manifesting Vishuddhi Chakra already, has that solution. There is a resurgence of old faiths and a rise of new ones. In the first century too, there were many gods and many lords. Yet the apostles boldly affirmed the uniqueness, indispensability, and centrality of Christ. We must do the same. So all these things are very clearly laid out. That's why we should know them. Billions of dollars are spent on this. You should know why. Why there's so much opposition to what is called anti-conversion. Why so much opposition? Because fundamentally in this Lausanne covenant, it says, it is your responsibility to not allow to, and we'll see later actually what is told is that that Jesus the Christ will come again when his word is preached to every land. So that's why this focus on global evangelization, because he will come again when his word is preached, lived in all lands. So that's why the goal is there. We have to preach it in all places. When it's spread to all places, then he'll come again. So it's the responsibility given through the Lausanne Covenant that you have to convert people in all lands, because only that will bring him again. And he's the only way. And other religions cannot be tolerated. Other paths cannot be tolerated. They're not equal. They don't lead to the same thing. They lead to judgment, eternal separation, hell. They are the evils. So here we see many gods and many lords is boldly affirmed against the uniqueness and indispensability and centrality of Christ. So we must do the same. So we must say that many gods and many lords is boldly affirmed against because of the centrality of Christ. So specifically for Sanatana Hindu Dharma, who has many gods, many lords, many deities, who they are all living, we know. That's why it becomes a little bit questionable if you have to boldly affirm the uniqueness and centrality of Christ, then why are we representing Jesus as Subramanya and Buddha, and as maybe a Muni or a Rishi, and as having many arms like Hindu deities are represented? So it becomes sort of extremely confusing as to why Jesus is represented as a Hindu. If people representing Jesus as a Hindu so much want to be Hindu, then if Hindu is, there's so many good qualities here shown in yoga posture, if there's so many good qualities of Hindu that you want to, and Hindu deities that you want to dress up Jesus as them, then the system of Sanatana Hindu Dharma is already there. You can just take it in practice. So you have to ask why, if those people are bound by their own covenant to not accept any other gods or any other traditions or any other religions, why are they dressing up their only savior to look like yours? So you can please answer in the comments. We've got 5 more items to share from the Lausanne.org. this excerpt says, no warrant for saying that salvation can be found outside Christ. So similar to what was said earlier, that no dialogue about other traditions offering the same as Christ is tolerated. Same here. There's no warrant for saying that salvation can be found outside of Christ. So do not say any other way is possible. That's not accepted. Here, this tells that even Jews must acknowledge Jesus as their Messiah. From Lausanne.org, need to acknowledge Jesus as their Messiah. We therefore reject the thesis that Jews have their own covenant, which renders faith in Jesus unnecessary. So this says Jews don't have their own, we reject the thesis that Jews have their own covenant that renders faith in Jesus unnecessary. So it's saying Jews don't have, we reject the fact that Jews have their own covenant. That means they don't have to accept Jesus. They still need to accept Jesus. Earlier in the paragraph it says, need to acknowledge Jesus as their Messiah. So the Lausanne Covenant is saying that Jews need to acknowledge Jesus as their Messiah. They've used the words previously, like the principalities and powers of evil, Christ's victory. And now it's saying that Jews need to acknowledge Jesus as their Messiah. So, see, it makes sense. It's very clear. What is the intention? There's no acceptance of any other path. Even here, Jews need to acknowledge Jesus as their Messiah. We reject the thesis that Jews have their own covenant. No. Which renders faith in Jesus unnecessary. No. They need to acknowledge Jesus as their Messiah. So that's the forces of evil, the eternal separation, the judgment, all that comes if you don't follow this. Whether it's Jew, multiple gods, Hindu, etc. It literally says, we saw earlier, other religion. Any other religion, you can see on the website, it says other religions. It was we were rejecting the dialogue that other religions can offer the same thing. Specifically says other religions, no. Specifically here says specifically Jews have their own covenant, no, rejected. So did it make sense? You don't have a right to protect yourself. You cannot do that. It's not right. It's wrong. You'll be eternal separation. It's evil. And it's the principalities and powers of evil. Many gods, it can never be accepted. So then it can be clear. What is the intention? What is the intention of, at least from the Lausanne Covenant? What's the intention? The intention is, if you don't accept our way, it can never be accepted. You'll be in eternal separation. That's the principalities and powers of evil that the Christ has to overcome. His kingdom has to reign eternal. Every tongue has to speak His name. That's the intention, and that's what the global, the International Congress on World Evangelization of 1974, where the Lausanne Covenant was taken up by 2,300 evangelicals, is saying that the intention is, quote unquote, to reframe the global Christian mission. So what is needed is that has to be practiced and spread to every part of the world for Him to come again. That's the point. Only when that happens, He'll come again. And everyone else is wrong. So there's no place for Hindus to exist. You have to be converted. Anyways, you're going to be eternally damned to eternal separation. And then here it says, we specifically reject the thesis that Jews have their own covenant, which renders faith in Jesus unnecessary. They still need to acknowledge Jesus as their Messiah. So it says here, even Jews need to recognize Jesus as their Messiah. So then, certainly, obviously, Hindus. All Hindus out there, you need to recognize Jesus as your Messiah, according to the Lausanne Covenant. And this is specifically the Manila Manifesto from 1989. A few more short points here to share. So another quotation from the Lausanne.org is telling that Jesus alone is worthy of worship, and because of his death and resurrection. So it says, it's referring to Jesus, it says, alone, with the Father and the Spirit, is worthy of worship, faith, and obedience of all people. There is only one gospel because there is only one Christ. And because of his death and resurrection is himself the only way of salvation. So it's saying only Jesus alone is worthy of worship. Which again begs the question, then why is he depicted as Buddha and Subramanya? And possibly as rishis? And as we know, many Hindu deities represented similar to this. So why is Jesus being shown in multiple forms, representing multiple deities of Sanatana Hindu Dharma, when specifically, we're getting information contrary to that? So this one specifically says, because of his death and resurrection. So because of his death and resurrection, he's the only way. So, but even with the example of Yogananda, Paramahamsa Yogananda gave a speech in a banquet hall, and he said, "Thank you, I've had a wonderful life, I'm going to leave the body now." He did the namaskar and left the body. So, and we see many examples of Buddhist monks and other monks that are, we know that Venkateshwara literally became the deity in Tirupati temple. He just became the deity. And Ramanujacharya, also his deity is literally his body. You can see in the form of his deity that is very, very popularly known. He sat down, and the deity that is worshipped there is literally his body. Inside, the bones and all that are there. And there's many examples of many Mavdar Babaji is known to be living for many thousands of years and can take various physical forms. So in Sanatana Hindu Dharma, we already know that the consciousness can embody multiple forms, right? The Shiva's Leelas, he comes down in many forms, takes many forms for various purposes. So we already know consciousness can embody various forms at different times for various purposes. So this specific point is saying because of his death and resurrection. So because he went through a process of death and came back, that is sort of validating that as the only one worthy of worship. But in Sanatana Hindu Dharma, we know the consciousness comes and fills many bodies. And the consciousness is always there ready to fill more bodies. The consciousness exists beyond human bodies. So the process of life and death and resurrection is constantly happening through various examples of Sanatana Hindu Dharma. Second to last point, we therefore reject both the relativism, which regards all religions and spiritualities as equally valid approaches to God, and the syncretism, which tries to mix faith in Christ with other faiths. So other religions are not valid paths to God. Right? We're rejecting religions and spiritualities as equally valid. No, not equally valid. And especially the faith, for example, here, likely, according to this statement, is included how Paramahamsa Yogananda and his gurus, Sri Yukteswar, was also teaching aspects of Christianity, because it says, which tries to mix faith in Christ with other faiths. So it's also saying no mixing. Which again begs the question, who is sourcing to represent Jesus as Lord Subramanya, carrying a veil? Last point from Lausanne.org. Every true conversion involves a power encounter in which the superior authority of Jesus Christ is demonstrated. There is no greater miracle than this, in which the believer is set free from the bondage of Satan and sin, fear and futility, darkness and death. So other religions are Satan, sin, darkness, and death. So it's just talking about how to do converting, and that you have to demonstrate the superior authority of Jesus Christ in order to set the non-follower free from the bondage of Satan and sin. So if you're not following this, you're part of Satan and sin. We already saw the principalities and powers of evil. Christ's victory over the principalities and powers of evil. So you're in the principalities and powers of evil if you're not accepting this that is Satan and sin, it's eternal separation, it's darkness and death. So basically, if you're a Hindu, this is you. Okay, so hopefully that makes more sense as to why. And we're not saying, we'd have to do some more research to find out exactly which organizations ascribe to these kinds of things, but it at least gives some context for what really are some of the very, very large, very well-funded, extremely well-organized organizations. What are they saying? What do they say? What do they say about you doing puja? What do they say about you worshiping the deity that you worship? What do they say about you having the beliefs that you have? What do they say about you doing the practices you're doing in your Hindu temples? What do they say about you worshiping more than one deity? And so the Lausanne Covenant is saying in no way can that ever be accepted. Even Jews have to accept Jesus as their Messiah. So knowing that perspective exists and that it was agreed upon by more than 2,300 evangelicals in 1974 and reaffirmed with extensions and articles and points in 1989 and again and continuously up until now, and that it also has specific documentation on the website talking about anti-conversion in Asia, in India, and why the conversion protection laws need to be opposed in those places, and even creates graphics and gives information about why Hindu groups should not be protected by legislation. That should be more clear. So we see what can happen in a very short period of time. And so we thank everyone for joining today, and we will continue to share more updates. Please share and post your questions and comments and various related links, and anything you'd like reported on or your perspectives on various things. Please share news, updates, and links as well that you would like to be shared to more people and to be discussed, and we will continue to reach out and interact with all of you. Thank you all very much. We'll see you next time on the news updates for Hinduism Now Global Press.